Hello and welcome everyone to the 10th annual 2021 Student Research Symposium. My name is David Cox and I'm the director of Skeen Library in the OSL and the SRS. The SRS is an annual campus-wide event that provides both undergraduate and graduate students the opportunity to present their research in a variety of formats. Poster sessions such as the one today, oral presentations, and a 3-minute speech competition. If you have attended any events these past few days, we hope that you have found them informative, educational, as well as fun. We have a few more events today and tomorrow that we hope you'll consider attending as well, and we'll give you some more information on those at the end of this session. Thank you for joining us today for our fourth and final poster session. The SRS is grateful to Tech faculty member Professor Curtis O'Malley from Mechanical Engineering and Tech employee Director Tristine Hayward, who is in career services and student life. They're assisting us today to make things run smoothly along with other staff members. Dr. O'Malley will be moderating today's session, and Ms. Hayward, with the help of the SRS staff members, will be assisting with the tech. Now, normally, if we can even use that word anymore, normally the SRS would take place in person on our beautiful New Mexico Tech campus. But because of COVID-19, we are here in the virtual world, and this is actually the second time we have gone virtual with the SRS presentations. This session is a poster session. Several New Mexico Tech students will have the opportunity to present their research to you, and you'll be able to ask questions both verbally and on the chat feature. In a moment, Dr. O'Malley will start things off, but first a brief word from an SRS staff member.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Teams Norris and I work at the Office for Student Learning and I'm an SRS staff member. And because we have a lot to cover today, here's how this session today is going to unfold. So each student or group is going to give a brief presentation based on their poster, and then the moderator, Dr. O'Malley, is going to facilitate questions from the audience. So during presentations, all of you will be on mute, so that way there is no background noise or any interruptions. And when the time comes for Q&A, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. And the chat box is going to remain open, of course, throughout the entire session. So if you have any questions or comments there, you can put that in the chat box. And if you need any technical assistance, please feel free to send a direct message to Tristine. And for ease of use and access, the moderators, the volunteers, and the presenters are going to be listed at the top of their participant list. So a couple of things before we start. We really hope that there are no technical difficulties or any problems with internet access today. However, if we do experience a problem, please try to be patient as we work through it. If there is a power outage or any sort of major event, we'll be in contact with you via email if you've given us your email. So here's a suggestion for the session itself. You might want to change your settings to speaker view, which will make the visuals and the presenters the main thing on your screen. So from time to time, we will also be posting the link to the poster gallery in the chat box so that you can take a look at the posters throughout the session. And then finally, at the end of the session, we're going to share a link in the chat box that will allow you to evaluate today's presenters. So please fill it out as often as you are comfortable with, and you'll need to fill out a separate form for each poster and group. And I'm sure that the presenters will definitely appreciate your feedback. So thank you again for joining us today. And Dr. O'Malley, you can take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the fourth poster session. We have a total of 33 presenters presenting 11 different posters tonight, this morning, during the session. Please keep an eye out on the chat to get the link for where the posters are published online. The presenters here are all here with us live and will be able to answer questions after they present each of their posters or in the chat if we've moved on to the next poster. So let's go ahead and get started with Helping Hands is the first group up.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Tiffany Nelson, and today I am representing the New Mexico Tech Grip Gang, which conducted the project, The Helping Hands. I'm here with Ezra, Seth, Patrick, and Bethany, who could not be here, as well as Dr. Frank Rhino, who is our advisor. So we completed a project for the competition, NASA MITIC, which is basically just a competition that involves NASA's technology transfer program. And so our team took one of NASA's existing IPs, the spacesuit RoboGloves, and we produced a spin-off concept to be presented at Space Tank, which is their pitch competition. And so our project just involves formulating a plan for using this technology. Specifically, we wanted to use it for physical therapy as an assistance gloves that could be used remotely, meaning that patients wouldn't have to travel to the clinic for their therapy session. And so we proposed that this technology would allow therapists to help assist the movements of patients' hands, as well as monitor their progress remotely. And that would just allow for better results from the therapy. And so we developed a plan for how this concept would be developed, as well as how our startup would be funded through the NASA Small Business Program. And so with the help of New Mexico Tech and Hanger Clinic as our business partners, we defended the feasibility of this project in a pitch presentation that we competed in yesterday. So we were actually chosen as one of the top 8 finalists in the country for this competition. And we presented our pitch yesterday and answered some questions for judges. And it was just a really great competition full of many opportunities. And I would highly recommend that students participate in this in the future on a New Mexico Tech team. And if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Well, I guess to start off with congratulations.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for them? Well, while they think about it, so how does the glove work? Is the NASA robot glove like a true robotic hand in and of itself, or do you really put your hand into it and it assists?
Yeah, so I can take this question, basically they originally made the technology for the spacesuit as an exoskeleton type of thing. And so our plan was to modify that so it wouldn't necessarily be to be fitted over the spacesuit, but just to be like a regular glove to be fitted over like a regular hand on Earth that wouldn't need to be over a spacesuit. And they have specific motors in there and sensors that help assist the movement of tendons and strengthen them without causing harm to them. And Seth can touch on that a little bit more if you want.
Yeah, so basically, so you stick your hand inside the glove, and all along it are some artificial tendons with some sensors placed in the palm of your hand, but then also on the tips of each of your fingers. So what the sensors do is they sense how much force output or how much grip the user is applying. And then the sensors in there use artificial tendons to somewhat increase that output. And so it would allow astronauts to have to really be able to use less force while increasing their force output. So they could have better grip, but then also have less hand fatigue. And then there was also the gloves were designed to have increased hand dexterity. So of course you can imagine that in like the Orion spacesuits, such as for the upcoming Artemis missions that NASA is planning, they had a lot of restricted movements within the spacesuits, but these gloves were intended to have increased hand dexterity so that they can have more movement, less hand fatigue, and yeah, more force output and better grip overall. And so that's why we wanted to repurpose it, the same technology for physical therapy, for rehabilitation and hand muscles for people who need it.
I was wondering, Seth and Tiffany, if let's say a person's had a stroke, or like you say, physical therapy is necessary because of injury. or maybe even neck injuries that have, let's say, reduced a side of their body, let's say, to 25% out of 100. Okay, for strength and dexterity. This is kind of where the commercial sense of this goes. I'm assuming that a person can wear this type of a glove, not just as physical therapy, but maybe for occupational therapy circumstances or things like that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, seems pretty fun. It's very entrepreneurial on your part.
Yes, the competition is really that type of project.
So I think if there's no more questions, I'll ask, what's your next step then, now that you're one of 8?
So we actually did present in the competition for the top 8 finalists yesterday. And they actually chose a winner. We were not chosen as the final winner. They did not do places though. But we were all congratulated and told that it was a very close competition and we did very well and represented New Mexico Tech very well. So we will probably not be taking this development any further unless we want to propose it possibly to New Mexico Tech as an option for students to carry out, but yeah.
Thank you. Great job. Yes. All right. Looks like next up is Princess Diana's team.
Hello. Are we all ready to go?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Trevor Fields. I'll be going over the first half of the poster. Our teammates, Joshua Gibbs, Daniel Shanos, and Eric Sandoval will be fielding questions, and Tiffany Nelson will be taking over for the back half of the poster. You guys already know her. So our project was proposed to us by Spectrum, which is a company focused on creating cheap and safe imaging process. So this would be something to replace something like X-rays. As part of their mission, they contracted out to us to build an ultra high frequency instrumentation amplifier. The basics of an instrumentation amplifier is that there are 2 buffered inputs, and the buffers help to isolate the signals. The output of those buffers runs into a difference amplifier, and that difference amplifier subtracts between 2 signals, and then the output can then be used for whatever purpose is needed. The challenges that we faced in this is because working at the ultra high frequency band, all of the ideal models that we have of resistors, capacitors, and even wires start to break down. And we have to start to consider all of the capacitances, inductances, and resistances of every component, even if that's not its primary purpose. Another challenge is in that every single wire becomes an antenna. And so, for example, in your phone, they use a very tiny piece of exposed copper to transmit between, for example, a Wi-Fi router. Well, for us, every single piece of tiny exposed copper that we are using in our design is a problem for that reason. Now we have some very stringent design specifications and design objectives. We do use the word ideal in our acronym because that is essentially the goal, is to create something that behaves ideally under these tight requirements. And the real challenge was to make it cheap. There are existing implementations of this exact product, but they're around $8. And our goal was under $1. For our design method, we took the stages of the amplifier and we isolated them. So we designed an input stage, we designed our differencing stage, and we designed an output stage. We'd go through and we'd use ideal components in our simulations to verify our circuit design was correct. Then we'd go through and we'd add in all the parasitics and all the non-ideal factors into our simulations to verify and try to compensate for them in simulation. Then we middle world, and finally we would integrate all 3 of our stages together to test the whole design together. You can see in figure 2 our final design with all of our stages integrated. And then I'll hand it over to Tiff.
Yeah, so as for the results, we produced 2 PCB iterations of our prototype for the P Diana, and they did not perform the same as we would have hoped that the simulations produced, and that is just because the performance of the components were not really captured in simulation and once we implemented the PCB. And so we have implemented the working Princess Diana circuit design in simulation, but we have not been able to implement that design on a PCB prototype due to the short semester. And so analyzing these results, we've concluded that the ultra high frequency band leads to some difficult device characteristics that require more accurate models in simulation, as well as a longer project time allocation. And in the future, we hope to simulate the components further with more detailed nonlinear parameters, as well as better physical component characterization for a more effective PCB implementation. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for them? Is this a project that so is your sponsor providing you resources to make these things and model them, or is it all on your own in-house?
It's all in-house. They've provided advice, but no resources beyond that.
Do you think there would be any advantages to, I'll admit I'm a little, electrical is not my field. So producing this thing in a clean room or a more advanced manufacturing environment?
Somebody.
Daniel, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I don't think that producing this in a clean environment was really our goal. We had talked about isolating our circuit inside of tinfoil to isolate any outside noise. But for the most part, all of this was, the PCB was sent out to PCBWay, I believe. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. And then these parts were, small components were soldered onto the PCB in-house.
Better instrumentation definitely would have been helpful. The electrical engineering department doesn't keep things which devices which can characterize and measure at these high frequencies available to students at all times. So that was a challenge.
In relation to that one, do they have them? You just have to get special access to them, or do they not have them at all?
Part of our issues was that some of the function generators didn't generate signals at a high enough frequency that we needed for testing. I don't know if Trevor, you might know if we actually have those devices, but as far as I'm aware, we didn't have those devices, and so we had to create our own oscillators to generate those functions.
Yeah, we do not have the function generators to operate at these frequencies. We do have oscilloscopes to measure at these frequencies. And yeah, special access is a bit challenging during COVID times.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Good job. Up next, we have Hacker Tracker.
Okay, thank you.
My my team a second here. And I think we're good. Great. So we are the Hacker Tracker, and our team consists of Luke Pickert, Alexander Ivalo, Adrian Hernandez, Alejandro Gomez, and myself, Ezra Montoya. But to give an overview of our project, we'd like to address the increasing rate of electronic warfare in this day and age. And essentially, we have been able to use our projects to track a malicious transmitter. And this is used with several nodes working together, basically with software-defined radios. And each radio, each node would be able to estimate the location of the malicious transmitter. And we would be able to get an output from the data and basically take these measurements to estimate where the location of this transmitter is. And that is used through GNU radio using a flow graph and a multilateration algorithm. And essentially, we wanted to be able to track this malicious transmitter in real time. However, we were able to successfully locate the location of each node using the software-defined radios. However, we were not ultimately able to get the malicious transmitter's location in real time. And I believe someone's going to go over the background results.
Yeah, so as Ezra mentioned, we had 3 essential hardware and software components. These were software-defined radios, which are SDRs, GNU radio software, and the Global Navigation Satellite System software-defined receiver, which is known as a GNSS SDR. And so unlike traditional radios, which are heavily hardware-based, SDRs are software-defined, so they're more they give us more flexibility when implementing RF communication systems. And the GNU radio software includes digital signal processing blocks that can be used to easily implement and simulate SDRs. And lastly, the GNSS SDR is a platform that allows us to receive GNSS timing and positioning data. Now I'd like to go over some requirements that we had for this project. The system must, 1, utilize SDRs, GNU radio, and GNSS SDR. 2, localize a malicious transmitter to within 10 meters CEP, which is circular error probability. And 3, be portable and fit inside a backpack. Now I think Ezra is going to talk a little bit about the experimental methods. Or Alex.
Hi, yes. So for this project, we had 2 approaches, a simulation and then an offline test. So the goal of the simulation was we wanted to model the system, the algorithm, and try to get an idea of what our circular error probability would be for an ideal system. As we continued testing, we were able to get an uncertainty measurement of our GNS SDR, which we then used a Monte Carlo simulation to sort of model how that uncertainty propagation contributes to error. And then in terms of the offline test, we used SDRs to record the signal strength called the RSSI, or Received Signal Strength Indicator flow graph, as well as using SDRs to obtain position measurements. With these data collected, we could then implement the multilateration algorithm to get a position estimate. And yeah, so those are our 2 main approaches to sort of characterize the system and to design a system. I believe Alejandro Gomez is now going to talk about results.
Thank you, Alex. I will be talking about the results section of this project. First, it was necessary to characterize the signal strength of the malicious transmitter. We are using a walkie-talkie as the malicious transmitter. To do this, we perform a distance to strength test, just to get an idea of the power readings we should be expecting from the received signal strength indicator, the RSSI. flow graph we developed in GNU Radio. We took measurements every 15 feet all the way up to 210 feet, again, to get a baseline measurement of the distance versus the signal strength of the walkie-talkies. Once we got positive results from the distance to strength test, we performed what is called the offline test. This was done by first locking each position of the nodes using GNSS SDR software, followed by running the RSSI flow graph to log the received signal strength of the malicious transmitter over time. The team was able to log data of 4 different nodes positions after countless attempts. Figure 4 shows a plot of the RSSI values versus the sample numbers. With the RSSI data collected on the GNSS SDR position fix data, we can then use the multilateration algorithm to get an estimate of the malicious transmitter location. One of the biggest issues we encountered was not being able to constantly get a position fix from each node. We are using 4 different laptops to run the GNSS SDR software, and some will end up locking after 15 to 20 minutes of running, while others will only take 2 to 3 minutes to get a GPS position fixed. Once having this issue resolved, we are planning on testing again to log as much data as possible and use the multilateration algorithm to locate the malicious transmitter. Up next, we have Luke.
Yeah, so as we previously mentioned, we were unable to completely integrate and implement the system as we initially planned to fully multilaterate and position fix a malicious transmitter in real time with several nodes. However, we were able to gather a significant amount of data through our several different systems that we've implemented. The issue that we have ran into over and over again is integration, that we have several systems now, and we have GNSS SDR, which is wonderful open source software. It has some of the best documentation ever on any open source software I've ever seen, but it still is a huge monolithic software package that is difficult to integrate with. So that ended up taking a lot of our time, but we're still continuing our development, and hopefully we'll be able to integrate the system in the next couple of weeks. Is there any questions?
Thank you. So a quick question here. So just so I understand the concept. So you're looking for somebody sending a malicious signal that might interfere with like a drone flight or things like that, or?
Yeah, it could be anything. Any transmitter that's transmitting on pretty high power to block any other kind of signal or spoof a signal, or there's many ways that you can interfere with, yeah, like aircraft navigation systems and all that.
Anybody else have questions for them?
I do have a question. So how does this differ from an RFID blocker? I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm just trying to understand like the difference between this and something like that.
An RFID blocker, as in like one of those plates you can put over your credit cards to block signals?
Exactly. Like, how does that translate into something similar, if that makes sense?
This would be, rather than blocking signals, this would be to be able to find someone who's doing some, I don't know, does anyone have a better answer to that? This is a more active solution, I think I would say, than it could be applied to some of the same things with hackers trying to send RF to different nefarious goals. But this is a more active solution, so you could actually maybe track down that person who's doing malicious things, if that makes sense. Whereas an RFID blocker, you would protect your card and whatever, but you wouldn't have a way for like law enforcement to find that person, I guess would be the best answer.
Awesome. Thank you.
We also have another question in the chat from David Cox. He was asking if we could describe the Monte Carlo simulation a little more. Luke or Alex, I know you guys worked on that a little more. If you guys can expand on that.
Yeah, I can take that question. So when we were sort of getting baseline measurements of our GPS system, there's actually a node on campus, like a geographic node, that has like a set GPS location. So we were able to set up our system and take a measurement, and we got like an error from our measurement of about 1.5 meters. So we know that each of these nodes can potentially be off by 1.5 meters. So using a Monte Carlo, we were able to simulate how these nodes can randomly shift or be off from where they should. And then using quite a few random, generated variables as Monte Carlo does, we were able to model how this uncertainty changes. And we could even, plot out where like these nodes, like how they shifted, like how did that contribute to having a major error versus like a really like minor one. So basically the Monte Carlo is just an error propagation simulation.
Yeah, we calculated, I think Alex calculated 100 points, and then you can just count basically 50 points inside that ring and 50 points outside, and that's your CEP. So that's what that blue circle you see on the poster is. And as you see, it's working fairly well. There's some error, but it shows basically that it's a feasible thing to do.
Thank you, guys. I think with that, we should switch over to the next presentation, and we make a jump over here to biology. So we've got recombination, inheritance, and structural variation in mitochondrial genomes of a freshwater gastropod.
Hi, my name's Bridie Alexander Laurie. I'm with the Cytonuclear Lab, and this is my research that we're doing in conjunction with University of Iowa, who's producing and giving us our snails. So mitochondrial inheritance, uniparental, leaky, or biparental, it's kind of assumed that mitochondrial inheritance is maternal, strictly maternally inherited, SMI, right? And you see that in humans. We've always assumed that humans are entirely SMI, but we've had some recent reports of biparental mitochondrial inheritance in humans, which is of concern because there's a lot of diseases such as like MRF, which is a type of epilepsy, which is related to mitochondrial DNA. So as far as like transmission, risk factors, it's important. So biovalves are a really good model for these because they've been seen to have a bunch of kind of wonky inheritance patterns. Over 100 biovalves have shown doubly uniparental inheritance. So unlike strictly maternal inheritance, you're also getting paternal inheritance, but it's kind of either or. So you're either getting the maternal or the paternal. And down here you can see I have a graphic for maternal inheritance, which is what we assume. And then on the right, I have the DNA of the Potamopyrgris antipodarum. And you can see it's circular. That's because it's mitochondrial DNA. And mitochondrial DNA is very similar, it's bacterial DNA basically, because that's how we got mitochondria. So we've recently seen recombinant mitochondrial DNA in pooled whole genome sequencing data. And that means that we're seeing base pairs that are different in the DNA, but they're significantly different. It's not one of the known alleles, it's just something else. So it implies heteroplasmy, which is having multiple distinct mitochondrial DNAs inside one cell, or potentially biparental inheritance, which, yeah, like I said before, is either getting from your mom or your dad, and kind of just randomly between those. So our design that we're working on for testing mitochondrial inheritance in this freshwater gastropod, mud snails, right? New Zealand mud snails. We're doing a series of crosses from snails from 4 different lakes. And Lady only has male lakes, hence why there's only males coming from there. And so we have a bunch of crosses that we've designed in order to ideally see these mitochondrial haplotypes so that we can sequence them. So at the bottom here, we've already done the crosses and the snails are here. And so those are the numbers that we got. There's that one like yellow spot, potentially that is that they are potentially incompatible, that you can't cross them. And we didn't get any out of that. So we're going to extract our DNA. We're going to extract some just normal DNA from the nucleus and the mitochondria and put that aside and sequence that on its own. But we're also going to do mitochondrial enrichment to, because mitochondrial DNA is much shorter than nuclear DNA. So you have to separate it out and carefully do that so that otherwise you're just getting nuclear information. And then we're sequencing it using MinION, which is Oxford Nanopore, which is really cool because normally with sequencing, you're doing it with by synthesis, where you're making DNA and then as you add them, you see what color. Anyway, but this doesn't do that. It's actively using the gradient of ions and reading it as it goes through this pore, which is a really cool modern technology. So it's exciting. We're also going to pool some of our DNA so that we can get deeper reads and get more information using less like flow cells. But yeah, are there any questions?
Hey, Bridie. So do you have any kind of incidence information on how common male mitochondrial inheritance is?
In humans?
Yeah.
It's supposedly not very common, but we've just been assuming for so long that everything is strictly maternally inherited. And you don't see very often, because you don't sequence it very often. You only sequence it when someone is having like mitochondrial issues or metabolism issues. So the reason that we've been seeing it lately is because we've had case studies where people have been having issues and then you sequence them and you realize that their mitochondria doesn't match their mother.
Yeah. So, I mean, you would think like if women are protected against sex-linked diseases because they have two X's, would the same apply for mitochondrial genetic variants, or you think it's, yeah?
That they'd be protected?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a good copy, then the bad copy doesn't necessarily have an effect. Like would it be a recessive effect, or would it be more like a dominant disease?
It would be more dominant. Usually with mitochondrial disease that's related to like the genome, the mitochondrial genome, you sequence the individual and then you also sequence the mother to see if she also has this, but it's just not affecting her. Yeah. But also what they've been doing recently is they also just, for shits and giggles, sequence the father. And they've been finding that more often than they thought, there's some biparental inheritance. They're getting it from at least some of their mitochondrial genome.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I worked in a genetic testing lab. No, I was going to say I worked in a genetic testing lab for a while, and 10% of daddies weren't daddy, which was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with biparental inheritance is you're getting kind of both mother and father. And you'd think father would be in a lower likelihood, or you get less of father's mitochondria when you do. So yeah, like if your mom is pretty good, you're good.
Yeah, so I mean, a sperm only carries a single mitochondria, right? Is that true in the snails as well, that the sperm has one and the egg would have multiple?
I'm not actually sure. But yeah, I mean, just like from the nature of it, eggs are much larger than the sperm in like majority of eukaryotes. So the mother is going to have the majority. It's just how much they can repopulate. Usually the mother's, the egg cell kills all of the organelles that the father cell brings in. So it's kind of like, why would they not kill it?
Yeah.
Why would they let it reproduce to the extent that you have this mixed mitochondrial makeup?
Cool.
Interesting. So what's the next step for your study?
For my study after this, so in the future, we would want, well, it kind of depends on what we find, really. Because if we can see heteroplasmy, then we really want to kind of expand that and see, like, kind of like speculate mechanisms for heteroplasmy and stuff like that. But then alternatively, if we don't find heteroplasmy, we've also added in that we can look into structural variation. So if we sequence it all and we don't see this heteroplasmy that we're looking for, and we don't see this inheritance pattern, we're still going to look into structural variation. And potentially that could be a mechanism for this like biparental appearance, or this recombinant DNA.
Thank you.
And then also expanding into humans. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Any last question, or we'll move on to the next group? All right, well, again, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Up next, we have evolutionary dynamics of Rubisco. Maybe I should let you describe the title of yours. I think you're still muted.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Catherine Batchelder, and this is my research in the evolutionary dynamics of Rubisco and olipolyploid coffee. So polyploid species are a result of whole genome duplications in which a diploid organism's genome has duplicated. Whole genome duplication events are very common and can have profound consequences on the genetics, ecology, and overall selective pressures of a species. And olipolyploidy is the hybridization of two or more species and often triggers whole genome duplications. So in photosynthesis and cellular respiration, there are enzyme complexes that are composed of two or more subunits. One of these subunits is encoded by the nuclear DNA, while the other is encoded by the organelle DNA. And in plants, this enzyme complex is known as Rubisco, which is shown in Figure 1. So as shown in Figure 1, the green part is the RCBL, maternally inherited chloroplast genome. And the yellow part is the RCBS subunit, which is encoded for by the biparentally inherited nuclear genome. The red parts indicate the interactions between these two subunits. And if something happens and these subunits cannot interact, then at least in the plant case of plants, photosynthesis cannot occur and the plant would die. And in some cases, hybridization-induced whole genome duplications can cause these subunits to become incompatible. So in my research, I was looking at Coffea arabica, which is an olipolyploid resulting from the hybridization of Ctenophora and Eugenoides. And the tree at the bottom shows our current understanding of the relationships between the different coffee species. And as you can see, the paternal Arabica C, shown in green, is more closely related to Canephora, while the maternal Arabica E is more closely related to Eugenoides. And so what I did was I was looking for a pattern of inheritance in Rubisco for the biparentally inherited RCBS subunit. And to find that, I first identified the genes that encoded the RBCS subunit in each Coffea species. And then I ran blast searches on these genes against the entire genome of the respective species. And those results of the blast searches can be seen in Table 1. And then I took those results from the blast searches and I found the genes for those and aligned them in MEGA. And you can see the alignment in the very colorful figure at the bottom. And in the cases where the color aligns vertically, this indicates that the nucleotides are shared amongst the different species and the different chromosomes. In places where there's a break in the color, this shows divergence amongst that species. So I took that alignment and I made a tree shown on the right. And this showed us two very interesting results. The first one being that the Arabica chromosome 7C was grouped with the Eugenoides chromosome 7 and the Arabica chromosome 7E. And this was interesting because it kind of contradicted our known understanding of how these species were related, going back to the first tree at the bottom of the poster. The second interesting finding was that the Eugenoides chromosome 2 was grouped with the chromosome 11s and not the other chromosome 2s. And so both of these findings indicate that there is potential gene conversion on events on these chromosomes that cause them to be grouped like this. And in the case of the chromosome 7s, this also indicates maternal bias when it comes to the RBCS subunit. And then coffee is actually the 6th olipolyploid species to show this maternal bias for encoding the RCBS subunit of Rubisco. And overall, it's just interesting because the Coffea arabica only formed from this hybridization event 10,000 years ago, which I know sounds like a really long time, but for gene conversion, it's not that long at all. It's like a blink of an eye. Yeah, so in the future, I'm going to analyze other crop species for patterns of inheritance on the RCBS subunit of Rubisco. Thank you. Are there any questions?
So I have to say, gene stuff is and biology are not my specialty. So if this question is irregular, sorry. So trying to understand here, are you saying that they've evolved so that they're more similar, some of these genes that weren't to begin with? Is that what we're seeing?
Yes. So, yes. So when the hybridization event between Eugenoides and Canephora happened, what should have happened was what's shown in the small tree at the bottom, but instead, for some reason, the genes that encoded for the biparentally inherited subunit were more maternally biased. So yes, I'm sorry, does that answer your question? Yes. Oh.
Yes, I think so. Anybody else have questions?
Catherine, so evolution, or whatever a drift, is a generation by generation thing. Do you know what the generation cycle time is for coffee? How long do these plants live?
That is a good question.
Because number of years may be less important than number of cycles. Yeah.
Yeah. I do not know the generational time of coffee plants, or how long they live before they die. But that is a good question. I will look into that.
Yeah, I'd have no idea either. So, okay.
I guess so. One more question to close this out. So, what are the implications of this finding? Right, I know it's unexpected. Is it a good thing or a bad thing, or?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a good or a bad thing. It's just it's telling us something that we didn't know before. So, and also it kind of helps us determine the evolutionary history by looking at all these crop plants in general. It helps us determine the evolutionary history of rubisco. And by doing that, we can also look at how it's changed throughout history and possibly learn how to edit it in the future.
And do you have any, do you have any idea whether this hybridization was potentially natural or if it was potentially human, human interference? Humans would have been beginning to, grow crops around then.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but yes, as Dr. Cox pointed out, that it was probably agriculture, because humans were starting to do agricultural stuff, and also Kaffier is a very common bean used in Europe, and yeah.
Ethiopia, I think, for the origin, is it? Joel could probably correct me. I don't know.
Yeah. So it was probably the resulting accidental hybridization. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Up next, we have, switching back over to engineering, energy harvesting mechanism for solar power plant monitoring UAVs.
Hi, so my name is Mariah Gemmel, and my research advisor is Dr. Mustafa Hasnalian. As Dr. My research concerns energy harvesting mechanisms for solar power plant monitoring UAVs. So we're seeing a pretty big importance on renewable energy resources in the United States especially. And so with this, one of the big ones that we're seeing pop up in importance energy And we're seeing some pretty big solar farms popping up around the United States. And with this, you need to monitor your solar farms in order to efficiency, make sure that they're performing well. And it can be really difficult to monitor them, especially because they're in regions that have pretty diverse climate. It's pretty hot there, in desert regions usually. And so sending crews out to monitor them periodically can be unreasonable. And so what I'm proposing is a UAV to fly around these solar farms in order to monitor them for cracks, defects, damages, anything like that. It has been seen that each solar panel will have hotspots, and so a specific way that a UAV can monitor the solar panels is by looking for hotspots. And if anything is detected, can send a crew out to that specific area in order for a crew to take a look and repair it. However, one of the disadvantages is that they have a pretty short battery life, and so they have a short flight time. And so one way to get around this is by implementing energy harvesting systems for a monitoring drone. One of the really obvious ones is, of course, implementing solar panels on the drone itself. Obviously, if you're in a region is made for a solar farm, implementing some solar panels on the drone would be a good way to save energy. However, it's also been hypothesized that solar farms induce a heat island effect, which is similar to what's seen in large cities. And so it's also hypothesized that this would over the solar panels, in which a drone could use thermal soaring to take advantage of these thermals and also increase its flight time. And so an investigation was performed in console. And so half of a solar panel was modeled with symmetry applied to reduce simulation time. And a 15 by 33 by 25 meter cube was surrounding the solar panel in order to simulate the surrounding air. The material of this was glass with aluminum and structural steel supports. And the solar panels themselves were considered as a heat source, where they were considered to generate 20% of the solar irradiance at Earth's surface, or around 200 watts per meters cubed. And the temperature of the surrounding air, which was really far away from the solar panel and considered to not be was 309 Kelvin. And so you can see the results of this analysis in figure 2, where it shows an isothermal contour of the temperature. And you can see from this that it does suggest the presence of thermals. However, a larger simulation is needed to really see what kind of thermals we could be getting from this. And so it entail having more solar panels in an array in order to really see what size of thermals that we could actually be getting from this effect. And so in addition, the size of applicable thermals was investigated based on the gliding and baking angles of the drone. And so in general, you can only take advantage of thermals in which your turn is equal to or smaller than the thermal that you're trying to utilize. And so you want to be able to utilize, or you want to have a really small radius of turn, means that you can take advantage of many different types of thermals, and it's more applicable for your drone. And so a parametric, and then you can see in equation 1 that the radius of turn R, how it is related to the baking and gliding angles. And so using this figure 3, a parametric analysis in which we just looked at the dependence of the radius of turn on the baking and gliding angles. And so in general, you can see larger baking and gliding angles result in a lower radius of turn. And so this can be used in future analysis to find optimal baking and gliding for specific thermals of different sizes. But it is important to think about the realistic implications, because obviously if your baking and gliding angles are too big, your drone is just going to so you can use this analysis for larger thermals, but obviously take it with a grain of salt. And so in the future, what I've already talked about is enlarging the COMSOL simulation to actually figure out what size of thermals might be generated from these solar panels, and then using this analysis to find ideal banking and gliding angles for these thermals. And then using these banking and gliding angles, we can come up with some control strategies, a glider to take advantage of these thermals, and then we can actually go in and make some man-made thermals in Dr. Hassanalian's lab and test them out with a small drone. Does anybody have any questions?
What's the timescale like for, developing these defects in the solar panels? Like, how often do you think you're going to need to be inspecting?
Depending on the size of your of the solar farm in general. Obviously, if you have a really big solar farm, you'll need to monitor them pretty often. I think every day is probably a good, at least once a day. I don't have like a definite answer, but at least once a day, especially because in climates, you have regions which are desert regions and it's really hot and there's lots of dust and debris and things like that. Wind, it's important to monitor them pretty often to increase the efficiency of the farm.
Anybody else have any questions? So it sounds like the solar farm is a pretty interesting model to study because you're going to have a fairly well-defined, once you model it completely, and reliable source of thermals. But could this be expanded to other applications in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm on search for a drone on Titan, and so there's different levels in Titan's atmosphere that if from information from the Huygens probe, that there is suggested presence of thermals based on the temperature profile there, and so in space. If we need to implement some energy harvesting mechanisms. And so that's another application for this as well. And I'll also be looking at that with the kind of thermals that we can emit from Titan's atmosphere. I'll also be doing some experiments with that as well.
You also have a question for Mariah in the chat, or want to speak up? All right, well, thank you. If you do have some more, go ahead and put them in the chat for her. Up next is Anastasia with bio-inspired rolling robot for planetary exploration.
Hi, my name is Anastasia. My group mates are Michelle Sherman, Cole Dunning, Rodrigo Cervantes, and our research advisors are Mati Hachkenas and Mustafa Hassanalian. We are working on a bio-inspired rolling robot for planetary exploration, and our goal with this project is to design a new type of autonomous rover for lunar and planetary exploration. Currently, traditional rovers, such as ones on Mars, lunar rovers, they are limited usually to one type of locomotion, such as rolling treads, and this creates limitations with where they can explore if the terrain is really rough. Regions of interest such as lunar lava tubes, Martian lava tubes. Traditional rovers are not capable of going inside of these. They might also find that they have size restrictions because they might be too large to fit into more cramped spaces. So the rover that we are going to be building, it's capable of multiple types of locomotion, such as walking, rolling, jumping, and we are also expanding our group to include members who are going to be looking into swimming capabilities. So the swimming capabilities are going to be useful for going to Titan. We are hoping that our rover would be able to switch configurations and swim in the liquid methane seas that Titan has. Walking, rolling, jumping, these are all useful for going to the moon, going to Mars, going to Venus. Of course, with all the different environmental conditions on these different solar bodies, the robot has to be optimized individually for each target destination. This means like different materials, different jumping power, I guess we could say, because if you're jumping on the moon, you're going to use different forces than if you're jumping on Venus. So currently, how far we've gotten is we have fabricated a couple different prototypes. These are mostly so far just proof of concept, such as figure 3. This is the latest one that we have. So we tested this by rolling it down multiple hills, such as like grassy, just dirt, things like that. And we were testing the stability of it, and it was able to successfully stay upright completely on its own. And so it did fall over when it reached the end of it, and it had no more momentum to keep going. But this is still kind of a success in our eyes, because this proves that even without electronics, it can still move on its own without any energy supplies when it comes to hills and things. So this is a good idea for energy conservation. We have acquired some electronics, such as motors, that need to be implemented into these prototypes. And so the driving mechanism for this is going to be a pendulum on the inside. And so the motors will control the pendulum, and the pendulum will move forward and backwards, like along the axis where the legs are, and also side to side for steering. And so hopefully this will be able to provide enough momentum to push the robot to keep it moving forward. If this doesn't work out, we also have the crawling configuration that we have not started research on yet, but it is an idea. So the legs will be able to move around the body into more of a traditional spider configuration, as seen in like figure 1. This would also be the same configuration used for swimming. And then jumping, we're hoping to do that with the configuration that we have for the prototypes. So we have currently springs in the knee joints of all of our legs. And so if we can attach some sort of motor system to contract all of these, to contract the legs and then quickly release it, it'll be able to jump. We are also experiencing problems with stability when standing still. So we are looking into kind of possibly a bike stand system or different feet configuration that make it stable while just standing still. I've been working on dynamical modeling of our system. This is a 16 degree of freedom system. And so modeling is proving to be slightly difficult, but we are hoping that by putting the equations in MATLAB, solving them, we can provide simulations for different environments and predict the behavior of a robot and incorporate that into our design. So the last thing we have to do after all of this is we have our basic electronics, we have to integrate those. And then from there, it's just continuously redesigning from the problems that we have, incorporating new things, incorporating our new leg configurations, and so on. Any questions?
Do you have any potential applications for this, maybe to test it out on Earth in some sort of application?
So we do have, I think the Polytechnic Institute, they have a Martian simulation room where we're going to test it out on once we have it moving on its own. But are you talking about applications on Earth once it's finished?
Yeah, like could you use it for something here to, establish it as proven?
Well, I mean, so it could be, I mean, if it starts to work, which hopefully it does, then we can test it pretty much anywhere. We could roll it down a mountain or something and see if it's stable enough to jump over all the boulders, which it hopefully will be. It could just be, exploration. You could use it in possibly search and rescue, attach cameras to it. We are planning to attach sensors to it to collect data. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
I do have a question. So in order to simulate the jumping in other atmospheres, how are you guys intending to do that? Let's say that if you wanted to do it on Mars, which is 1/3 of Earth's.
Hopefully we could do this with dynamical modeling. All of our variables can be changed, so such as the environmental variables, and then we can also change the forces that we're modeling with when it comes to such as like the jumping forces, things like that. So hopefully we can just do kind of plug in, say, Martian environment variables, and then variables for the different hardware that we have, and then test out different jumping forces and see which is best.
So all the testing is going to be done, it's going to be simulated, not necessarily like you guys are going to recreate an environment and test it on that environment?
Yeah, currently it's all going to be simulations. If we could gain access to so we could possibly also try to recreate it by increasing its rate, adding just random weights to it to try to simulate different gravities. But we are so far from that point right now.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Is there any last question? Then I think we'll move on to autonomous system for drilling in Antarctica.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Langton, and I am presenting our project, which is Boreas, autonomous system for drilling in Antarctica. This project is being done in conjunction with Iris Pascal, and the purpose of this project is to be able to do manual labor in Antarctica for those scientists. Currently, Antarctica has one of the most challenging environments in the world. The extreme temperatures, which average around -30 Cs, and the high-speed winds makes it very difficult for scientists to do certain experiments out in the open. So in order to help with those tasks, we are proposing to build a drone that is going to be capable of helping the scientists to do seismic research. So the purpose of this drone is that they're going to be able to dig a hole on the snow or the ice and be able to place the seismic sensors in it. In order to do this, our project, it's right now on our very early stages. So we're looking at different drilling mechanisms to be able to do this. So right now we're considering doing thermal drilling, which is the idea based on that is using a conductive tube that would be heated electrically or with diaphragm lens, which I'll go a little more in detail in a moment, to melt the ice, create the pressure to dig the hole, and also use that mechanism to deliver the seismic node into the ice. Another mechanism that we're looking into is the mechanical drilling, which, as the name says, is just pretty much using a type of a drill bit or an auger, kind of similar like the ones used for ice fishing, to be able to make the hole and then use another mechanism to place the nodes in it. And lastly, we're also researching an optical drilling, which with this one, we would be using a Fresnel lens to in conjunction with a mirror and a graphite, because one of the things that we have to keep in consideration, because it's Antarctica, the sun is never above us like it would be here. It's usually on the horizon, and it's always at that angle. So one of the methods for diaphragmal lens is that we can harvest the energy from the sun, use the mirror to redirect the sunlight, and use graphite or one of our either tubes or the mechanical drill to heat them up, melt the ice, and create the hole for our nodes. Right now, again, this is on the early stages. One of the other things we're researching is the configuration of our drone, which we're thinking as of right now to use a hexacopter drone that is going to be able to lift about 2 to 3 kilos in payload. That includes the sensor, the seismic sensor, and all the equipment necessary for it to fly and deliver the payload. And in regards to guidance and sensory, for the first part of our drone, or our first drone will be manual, meaning that we're gonna have a pilot controlling it, but the delivery system mechanism and the drilling will be autonomous. For sensor implementation, meaning that the payload delivery, that will be either using the tube, like I mentioned before, or maybe a grappling hook. We're looking at those two options right now, trying to figure out which one's going to be the best. And in regards to power, right now we're highly considering using an insulated lithium iron phosphate battery to protect. That's one of the batteries right now that are able to withstand very extreme temperatures, and would be able to withstand the roughly -30 degrees on average that Antarctica has. In conjunction with all of this, we're also going to use an unmanned ground vehicle or rover. This rover is going to be the charging station and the fail-safe mechanism for our drone. So in the event that the drone needs to recharge while it's in the middle of creating an array for nodes, the rover is going to be there for the drone to be able to go back, recharge. Also, it's going to transport the drone to the area that needs to go. And because rovers have a limitation as of how far they can go due to the terrain that Antarctica has, that's why we're going with a rover and using the rover, because they have the capability of flying in different areas and be able to do these conditions. So the rover, a primary function is going to be mainly, as I mentioned, the charging station, and also as a fail-safe. So if the drone, for some reason, it stops working and before it dies, it's going to send a signal to the rover so it can be rescued by the rover if the rover has access to it. In regards to future work, there's a lot of future work for it right now since it's on the early stages. So ultimately what we want to do is that we create an assembly line of drones that are able to speed the process of creating arrays for the seismic sensors. So that way we have one drone that is just doing the holes, another one that is placing the sensors, and the rover, and have several rovers with it so they can charge these drones. Another system that we want to do is create a drone that is going to be surveying the areas where the drilling drones are going to be working on. So that way we have enough data as of what is the type of ground that we're getting into, because Antarctica, depending on where you're at, it's very different. The ground gets to be very different. The snow is very different. In some areas, it can be very packed. The further you go into the center of Antarctica, it gets a little bit softer because it's a little bit less explored as compared to the coast area. And then lastly, another application that we want to do for this is to take it into space, to translate this into ice sampling on the moon and also for Mars as of right now. And yeah, so that is our project. Do you guys have any questions?
The SRS would like to let everyone know that Sarah won 3rd place yesterday in the 3-minute speech competition. So congratulations, Sarah.
Thank you.
Excuse me. So I know, like, when you go flying in an airplane and it's snowing, you have issues with ice buildup on the wings and things. Are you worried about that in terms of the rotor systems or the drones in general?
We are definitely considering that. One of the things that Antarctica has in place as part of the regulation is that in order to do work outside, there has to be like some sort of perfect conditions. And I put this in quotes because they're never perfect. But if it's like heavy snow or there's like temperatures that would be hard for humans to be in, they wouldn't allow to do any work, even if it's for drones or rovers or moving, equipment. So that's one of the sort of advantages that we have, that we wouldn't have to worry too much about some of these conditions. One of the things that we do worry about are the wind speeds, because those change it very quickly in Antarctica. The weather changes very, like in a span of like 5 hours. It can be bright and sunny, and then it's pouring rain, or the wind went from 5 miles per hour to 40. So those are the factors that we are definitely considering. I mean, we do worry about the snow and ice buildup, but we are not too concerned about that yet, due to the conditions that we are going to be working. But yes, we're keeping it in the back of our minds for sure.
But as following that, how close are the seismic sensors to each other? Like, is it reasonable that a drone can go out and do several of these, or is it, they go out and they do one and then they go back to base for the day?
That depends on, it will depend on Iris Pascal, how they want us to conduct those research. For the beginning, they want us to do like an array of, I believe, 5x3 sensors. So like just place 15 sensors and we should be able to perform those tasks. That's why we have the rover to be the charging station. And that's something that we should be able to be capable of doing for our first round. That's why we definitely want to go and test this out there to make sure that we are capable to, mainly the big thing will be the ice. How compact is the ice? Because that's going to be your biggest challenge. That will determine how fast we will be able to drill and perform those duties. And I know that there are some questions on the chat, but I haven't been following them. I don't know how like the lineup is for that.
I think most of those are for Anastasia. I've been trying to watch those. But does anybody else have any questions for Sarah? Well, thank you, and again, congratulations on your 3-minute speech.
Thank you.
All right, well, if anybody else has any questions come to them, Katie has shared the poster links, so you can go look at all of them there and come put some notes in the chat, and it looks like we'll have some time for general questions at the end. We're on track for that. So, up next, we have team talk about monitoring Artemis's water extraction pipeline for corrosion and abrasion on the lunar surface.
Hello, do I sound okay?
Yes.
All right, well, hello, my name is Skylar Hughes, and I will be presenting the project Monitoring Artemis's Extraction Pipelines Against Corrosion and Abrasion by Lunar Dust for Extended Habitation Using Acoustic Emissions. I am a small part of a diverse undergraduate team who are competing in the NASA Mines Artemis program. We were able to choose a problem that NASA will face and prepare a proposal for a year-long research project. This was accepted and funded in January this year, and now we have completed our research goals. The Artemis mission is NASA's plan to return to the moon by 2024. This includes plans to bring humans onto the surface of the moon for the first time in half a century, as well as set the real foundations for long-term habitation. If humans are to survive on the moon, they will need water. NASA has plans to extract water from ice near the polar regions and pipe it to the habitation sites. A graphic of this can be seen in the top left. These will be large, long, and isolated from the people who could repair them. Therefore, monitoring these pipelines' health in the lunar environment without the need of in-person inspection will be critical to ensuring continuous water supply. To solve this problem, we have proposed a sensor network utilizing acoustic piezoelectric sensors to characterize and localize damage before it becomes dangerous. Our mock-up of a distant future pipeline with such a sensor network can be seen in the lower left. The moon environment offers several environmental challenges to structural health that are not present on Earth, namely increased radiation, abrasion by lunar dust, which hasn't been smoothened by erosion, and corrosion. For this project, we designed an experiment to validate that our solution is usable in each of these environmental regimes with the goal of being able to both detect the process as well as characterize the differences between them. Each experimental setup included the piezoelectric detection system and a simulated hazard. The three experiments can be seen in the figure in the center. On the left, we accelerated corrosion of aluminum pipe with an impressed current. In the middle, we put many radioactive samples in a pipe, and in the third, we constructed a wind tunnel extension in which we ablated an aluminum pipe using regolith simulant. Each experiment provided many thousands of waveforms for analysis, with the exception of the radiation test. Each waveform collected also has some analysis run on it automatically to determine certain properties of the wave, like amplitude, peak, and centroid frequency, among many others. So the goal of the analysis was to determine which parameter sets, if any, produced groupings of data that distinguished between the corrosion and abrasion data sets. Our data showed a clear distinction between the two data sets, as seen in the plot at the top center, in which we were able to identify characteristic clusters that distinguished between both the corrosion and abrasion data sets. Therefore, we were able to successfully find a means to both detect the damage occurrence as well as characterize the differences between them. And this method is highly extensible. So in the future, we would like to not just distinguish between damage types, but characterize the process themselves, as well as localize the damage with multiple sensors. We plan to improve on some of these aspects when we present at other national conferences this year. And yeah, we would like to thank all of those who supported our experiments at Tech, as well as NASA. And there's many others who gave help with manufacturing and cutting of metal and things like that. And so yeah, that's the main overview. Are there any questions?
So I guess, can you expand a little bit more on where you want to go from here with your results, doing more testing, expanding the program, or improving it?
Yeah, so right now, basically what we have is we've done some experiments and we were able to tell based off of the structure of the data that say there was a difference between the abrasion and the acoustic test. In that plot there, you can see there's a cluster that is at 150,000 or 150 kilohertz in the abrasion data, and that's not present in the corrosion data, whereas the corrosion data has its own cluster that is unique to it. So there we were able to tell the difference, but in the future we would like to not just be able to tell, okay, this pipe is experiencing corrosion or this pipe is experiencing abrasion, but we'd like to be able to say, okay, this pipe is experiencing, you know, maybe like this abrasion in this location or with this strength or this severity, and get really precise information about it. And also, in theory, it should be able to give better understanding of the processes themselves. So that's sort of the future goal, I think.
So what, if anything, would be different about implementing this, say, on the moon? Are you going to get different responses from the electrical signals or complications?
Yeah, so one complication is that, I mentioned that the radiation experiment didn't really yield any data. I mean, the other ones gave us like tens of thousands of waveforms, but the radiation was like 0 data. And that's because our radiation that we were able to expose was like a very minimal amount. But on the moon, there will be a lot more radiation. And also, these sensors, if we're going to be operating them in a network, the algorithms for interpreting data over that network for localization and things like that become more complicated. And also just general installation of the system and everything like that becomes complicated as well. Especially, I believe, with networks of sensors, you need to be pretty precise with where you're placing the sensors. Because if you're trying to do localization and you're trying to combine, all these different waveforms all the time, signals can get mixed or misinterpreted if they're not located exactly where they're supposed to be. And also, obviously, we can't really simulate the lunar environment exactly. So we were doing abrasion experiments with a wind tunnel, but we don't have 0 Gs and maybe electrostatic considerations or yeah, so it's hard to say if they'll be exactly the same thing, but
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for them? All right, well, then one more and we'll move on. Why focusing on Mars over, couldn't you use this for pipelines here on Earth that might have a more immediate use?
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, structural health monitoring of this type, where it's like acoustic emissions, is a technology that is used for some of this stuff. Although I don't know if it's ever been organized like in practice on large scale pipelines with sensor networks characterizing damage and that sort of thing. But absolutely, it could be applied to essentially anywhere. In this case, the main reason we're focusing on the moon, I guess you could say, is because that's what NASA's Artemis project is focusing on. So we wanted to apply this to the moon problem, but it could be applied to numerous other things.
All right, well, thank you. Very interesting. Up next, we have measurement of the density field around supersonic conical projectiles using quantitative Schlieren photography.
Great. Thank you, Dr. O'Malley. My name is Jason Falls, and as stated, I'll be talking to you guys about the measurement of density of fields around supersonic conical projectiles using quantitative Schlieren photography. My research is with Dr. Michael Hargather. So shockwaves originate around bodies when conservation of mass, momentum, and energy cannot be conserved easily. As such, there's a near discontinuity in high-speed gas dynamics, high-speed gas properties, density, temperature, pressure. One specific case is conical projectiles. So what you're seeing in this left image is a cone flying at about Mach 2, traveling 2 times the speed of sound. Specifically of interest are cones because there's a closed form solution the density variation around said cones. So the lower left image displays the projectiles shot, in this case, out of a 50 caliber gun system, and the right basically shows the density variation. So along that axis, moving inward from that shockwave, there's a isentropic jump. So Schlerin photography relies on refractive changes in a medium, specifically in air. So this center figure displays a general setup of this quantitative Schlerin process. This provides an integrated field of the refractive angle field, and is obtained through the quantitative Schlerin calibration process, where we take an image of a known refractive disturbance, in this case, a 2-meter focal length lens, weak refractive disturbance, which is the characterizable refraction, and then save that picture, shoot the projectile through the setup, and then compare the refractive angle field obtained around the cone with the refractive angles obtained through the calibration process. So specifically, this is a 3-dimensional field around these conical projectiles that is axisymmetric. So in order to relate, or in order to solve the integral, we have to implement a deconvolution algorithm. In this case, it's the Abel inversion, and then apply the Gladstone-Dale relation, which is a relation between refractive index and density. So the inversion process changes the field from a refractive angle field to a refractive index field. Applying the Gladstone-Dale relation allows for the reconstruction of the density. Moving down, we see a contour plot of the conical projectile of the density. So as stated, the density should jump across the shockwave. We see a increase in density across that shockwave, and then as the flow gets turned back on that rear shoulder, we see an expansion fan, which gives the expected decrease in density. So for a validation of this method, the closed form conical solution is a shockwave and then a isentropic compression up to the cone surface. So this lower plot you're seeing here is walking away from the cone face, down, decreasing in density, and then stepping across that shockwave. And in the free stream, we see the density reconstructed, and shows it shows the correct density off of ideal gas law. So what this research is specifically, or what this research shows, is a 3-dimensional reconstruction algorithm of a 2-dimensional projection of a field. Data obtained from testing such as this allows us to validate computational fluid dynamics simulations and refine supersonic projectile designs. So future work will be looking at implementing a radon transform, which is somewhat less susceptible to input noise than this Abel deconvolution algorithm, which is used in tomography applications. And additional data sets for statistical significance compared with the projectile at varying Mach numbers. With that, I'd like to open the floor for any questions.
While we wait, see if anybody else has questions, where are you firing your projectiles at Mach 2?
So it's on the Emertech range up at New Mexico Tech, and I would like to acknowledge Emertech for their range assistance and safety precautions for this setup. So it's just a commercially available 50 caliber gun system with custom loaded 50 caliber cases.
So I know in future work there, you say a little bit about noise reduction. Are you looking at, modifying the projectile to reduce the noise, or?
Additional geometries are of interest. However, if you see in the free stream area around that conical projectile, there's a good bit of variation across that background. And the way that this Abel deconvolution algorithm works, it infers the free stream density and bases moving inward from free stream towards the cone surface to reconstruct that density. And that is somewhat susceptible to variations across the background. In the case of these projectiles, we're shooting into sandbags, and delicate optics and sand don't mix particularly well. Looks like Kenneth says, how does the outside environment affect your measurements / how do you control the wind temperature on the range? So specifically, we're shooting indoors. I guess I failed to mention that. So the air currents and temperature variations are assumed to be negligible inside. Essentially, we take a measurement to fix the temperature and atmospheric pressure to the ideal gas law at time of each firing. So that's the aim, to reduce input noise in free stream.
Great, thank you. Good job. Does anybody else have a last question before we move on? All right, then our last poster is eruption rates of Quaternary volcanism in the Rio Grande Rift.
Hi, hello, can everyone hear me? Awesome,
Yes.
okay. I will go ahead and get started. So yeah, our research is eruptive rates of Quaternary mafic volcanism in the Rio Grande Rift. My advisor is Dr. Laura Waters in the Earth Science Department. So before I dive into what our goals are, I just wanted to go over really quickly what mafic volcanism is. I'm sure most people maybe have never heard the word mafic unless you're a geologist. So essentially, mafic volcanism produces black basalt. And the basalt is black because of where the magma originates from. So it's due to the depth of melting. So mafic volcanism produces basalt that originates from really, really deep in the earth. So if you've ever driven, north up towards Albuquerque, between Los Lunas and Albuquerque, I mean, it's just littered everywhere. You can see big fields of black rock, and that is produced by mafic volcanism. If you drive out east and you go past the Valley of Fires, you can see some of the youngest basalts in the country besides Hawaii. So the previous 800,000 years of volcanic eruptions in New Mexico have been mafic. So with that being said, the goals of this research are to calculate the volumes of lava essentially being generated by volcanism in New Mexico over the last 5 million years so that we can produce an eruptive flux. A secondary goal of this research, so geologists don't really know the proportion of magma that is being erupted through volcanism versus getting stuck in the crust. So this is a fundamental question, and it's an open question because it's very hard to find a place that you can easily calculate eruptive fluxes. And New Mexico happens to be one of the places. I wouldn't say it's easy to do it here, but it's certainly our topography definitely makes it a bit easier because we have a lot of flat land here. So I'm going to go over a little bit of background of the Rio Grande Rift. So we are in a rift valley. It's a continental rift zone. So essentially what that means is New Mexico, the center of New Mexico is just being ripped apart, it's being split apart by tectonic forces. And this allows magma to actually leak up and come out of the crust. So if you look at the figure on the bottom left-hand side, you've got like this little green part and you've got red arrows circulating up. So that is where our basalt is being generated from. That is deep, deep, deep in the earth. You can see the orange part, that's our crust. And in the Rio Grande Rift, we actually have a very thin continental crust, which is why we have so many volcanoes here over the last million years. So the methods of generating volumes. How are we going to generate a volume of these basalt flows? One, it's very tricky because clearly you can go out to a volcanic field and you can see what the current topography is, but how do you know what the paleotopography, what the topography was before these volcanoes erupted? So that's what we do. And to do this, we use a GIS system that's called QGIS. And we download digital elevation models. We call them DEMs, and we can download them from a national server. And these are essentially like giant topo maps of New Mexico. So once we have these big DEMs, we use outlines of the basalt flows to clip the DEM. So we need to isolate the elevation data that is relevant to these fields. So once we have that outlined, that's essentially our surface of the basalt flow. So we have that. So once we have that, we need to figure out the base layer beneath the flow. And we do this by using an interpolation tool in GIS. And if you look at the green little figure, so that's going to be the shape of the lava flow. If you look at the dark gray one, that's going to be the elevation data clipped to the outline. And then if you look at the kind of whitish light gray figure, that's going to be the initial base topography beneath what is at present day. So the pretty purple picture is actually the thickness of the basalt flow. And how we get that is by subtracting the dark gray layer from the light gray layer. And that gives us a thickness. So you can imagine the thickness is like your height. Once you have the height, you can generate a volume. So that's how we do that. One of the issues that we did run into when generating these volumes is what we call paleotopography. So this is essentially a fancy way of saying old, lake beds, old dried up rivers, basins. New Mexico isn't always flat. A lot of it is flat, but there do exist natural variances in the landscape that we have to account for. And so sometimes the system, the GIS software, can't always do that. And so what ends up happening is you get this thickness that has like really, really crazy negative values, negative 500 meters. And logically, I think we all know that there aren't, huge gaping holes in New Mexico 500 meters thick. I mean, at least not a lot of them. So to account for this problem, if you look in the kind of the middle, there's that really long, thin figure, and it's got all the blue dots around it. So that's the Valley of Fire out near Carrizozo. And what we had to do is put additional data points in the middle of this flow to elevate the base topography to make it something, meaningful. There is an acceptable value for negative thickness because, there are holes in the earth. I mean, not giant ones, but they do exist. So once we have the volumes, you can see they're all listed in the table right there. The results, so these cumulative volumes over time give us a flux. So if you look at the very bottom middle, there's a graph right there. You can see there's a line that's kind of very gently sloping. So the flux was pretty low, and then you see this huge jump at the very end. And that was around 50,000 years ago where the flux, it jumps up by 2 orders of magnitude, which is huge. I mean, just a huge jump in volcanism, which is curious. So if we go over to the volcanic fields, you can see there are the 12 fields that we calculated the thickness for. If you look at those figures, they're different colors. In the middle where you see the really light, like yellow color, those are going to be the vents. So that's where the lava is coming out of. And the darker colors on the edge, that's going to be where the thickness is at its least value. So thickest where the lava is coming out of the earth, and thinnest, on the edges. Okay, so in Socorro, why this is particularly relevant to us is because, we're in Socorro, most of us are in Socorro right now. We actually live above something called the Socorro magma body. So the Socorro magma body is essentially a giant body of magma that is accumulated over time that hasn't erupted. So I think it's somewhere 10 to 15 miles beneath the surface of Socorro. And this is just an example of one of the places in New Mexico where basalt gets stuck in the crust, instead of erupted in a volcano. So again, one of the fundamental questions in geology right now is how much magma is being erupted and how much is getting stuck. So our results, in tandem with previous geophysical imaging on the Socorro magma body, find that about 5 to 10 times the amount of basalt is getting stuck in the crust rather than erupted. And this is really, really cool because we don't know why this is happening. No one has any idea. We can, we have hypotheses about why this is happening. Is this the generation of new crust? Is this how crust gets made? If New Mexico keeps splitting apart, are we going to eventually become an ocean? And is this the creation of new oceanic crust? We just don't know why so much is getting stuck and what it's going to do. Also, another interesting result of this research is the huge jump in volcanism and the eruptive flux that I pointed out earlier, the jump of 2 orders in magnitude. Why is it suddenly increasing over the last 50,000 years? An answer to that possibly is that the rate of extension in the crust, so the rate at which we are being pulled apart in the Rio Grande Rift, possibly is increasing. If you have more magma coming out, you have to have place for that magma to come out, There has to be a wide hole. It's like squeezing toothpaste through a pinhole, You have to widen the hole. So that could possibly be what is happening in New Mexico. If you look on the lower right-hand part of the poster, there is a graph that was actually made by a geologist, Matt Zimmer, in the Bureau of Geology here. So he actually graphed the eruptive frequencies in New Mexico. And so he's dealing with just numbers there, and I'm dealing with volumes. But what he found is that the frequency, the number of eruptions, is increasing through time. So that is supportive to our work because we show that the volumes of eruptions are also increasing over time. So it's flux versus frequency, which is very interesting. So future work, where we could go in the future, we're missing a key data set here to say, the rate of rifting is increasing. We can't really say that right now because we don't have enough correlative data. So something that would really help this research, that would support this research, would be earthquake data. So if the rate of rifting is opening, that's going to be recorded in earthquakes. I mean, it just has to be. So that's, that's essentially where this research, that would be the next step for this, is to try and find some evidence to support our results. And that's about all I have. So I'll open it up for questions.
Does anybody have a question already for Sophie or Ashley? I was reading the chat.
Ashley, I'm wondering, okay, so the thinning continental crust that we are kind of in right now here around the Rift Valley, okay, it's caused both by pressure under the ground as well as it gets relieved by earthquake, and that creates the cracks, or how does that work?
So
I'm thinking like with like places like Valley of Fire and things like that. All of a sudden you got this boop, you know, and it lays out there. So, so it's kind of a combination of all of that that finally works, or?
So the Valley of Fire is actually there because of something called the Carrizosa lineament. And essentially what that is a giant crack in our crust. It's a giant fault that has resulted from continental rifting.
Yeah.
And that's what allows, you know, the magma to come up and to be produced. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that around here, we're just feeling the ground stretch is basically what's happening because of the continental, let's say, crust being pulled in a couple of different directions. And we just happen to be in a very geothermal area that allows for that. So I don't know. We're thin, I guess.
Yeah, very, very thin crust.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so, you know, is it going to keep spreading? Is it speeding up? Is it slowing down? We're not really sure right now. But there is a lot of evidence that suggests that it is going to keep spreading apart, and that the volcanism is not dead in New Mexico.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm used to things like mountains up in Washington State going and things like that with magma, but this was fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's very relevant to New Mexico, you know, especially in terms of geohazard research, especially with Los Alamos labs and Sandia labs. You know, they want to know if we're going to have, you know, earthquakes or volcanism anytime soon. So it definitely is worth looking into, I think. And the results, I think, speak for themselves.
Thanks.
Sure.
I had one question. You know, how certain are you that there really was such a reduced volume 800,000 years ago versus, you know, has there been erosion and that's why you can't see it now?
That is a fantastic question, actually. And that definitely does happen. Erosion does happen. With how young the basalt, well, young relative to geologic time, with how young the basalt is, I don't think that there would be enough erosion to cause significant, you know, decreases in volume. But that is possible. I mean, we live in a state that sees very minimal rainfall, and a lot of erosion happens because of weathering of the rocks. And in a pretty dry and arid landscape like New Mexico, things get preserved for kind of a long time. So, you know, it is impossible to know how much has been eroded away. And that could be an argument against, you know, this huge increase. It's like, oh, well, you know, it's all been eroded away. But I don't think necessarily that much of a volume could be eroded away. I just don't think that is possible over such a small amount of time. I mean, if you're talking about a flow that's, you know, 5, 10 million, 30 million years old, yes, of course, it'll be eroded away to, you know, nothing essentially. But with how young, you know, 800,000 years is not too old, geologically speaking. But that's a very good point.
Well, does anybody else have any questions for this or other presenters? We're right at the end of our time, I think.
Ken actually had a question for Jason, the previous poster.
Okay.
So his question is, how does the outside environment affect your measurements? How do you control for wind or temperature on the range?
Sure, I think I addressed it, but we're shooting inside actually. So we measure the temperature and atmospheric pressure, and those are the two parameters that are required for ideal gas to set the atmospheric density. And wind is not an issue as, well, we're inside.
And Ken just said, oh, it was answered, oh noes. So
all good.
Thank you for the answer.
All right, does anybody else have anything to ask or share? There is an evaluation link here in the chat about our posters today, the SRS in general. All right, not hearing or seeing any other questions. I don't know if David, you want to take over?
I was just going to say, it seems like we've had a great discussion, great interactions and thoughts on these processes with the posters and research. So we want to thank the presenters. We want to thank you for attending this session for today. Also want to thank Dr. O'Malley and Ms. Hayward and everyone who was involved in making this virtual poster session a success. In the chat box, we've placed a link, of course, to the poster evaluation form. Please fill out as many as you are comfortable with and feel like you can give insight upon. If you take a look at the one, thank you there, at today's continuing activities, we have departmental showcases until 4:30 this afternoon in a number of different departments, and I suggest you look at the calendar for those and click in on those. And then the AIAA has a virtual drone demonstration going on, and its location is at the library, but you can see it virtually, and that should be a lot of fun. And for those of you who have some interest in trying to find out what energy is all about when you swing a golf club, the SRS has a golf tournament tomorrow. And I know mechanical engineering has a golf team. Curtis, are you in that one?
Am I still muted? Yeah, no, no, I don't actually know how to play golf.
Okay, I'm just checking. Okay, but thank you so much. We'll go back to that screen you just had up. We just want to thank you again for attending the 2021 SRS, and we look forward to seeing you in continuing discussions and, of course, next year as we present this program. So for that, I just want to say thanks again and stay safe in these days.